I am joined by Jonathan Frost, Director of Global Advisory for BioCatch. Hello, sir.
Hey, Nick. How you doing?
I'm very good, thank you for joining me. I think we should talk a little bit about Agentic AI, and perhaps you could first tell me exactly what that is and what that means.
Yeah, sure. So Agentic AI is all of the AI tools that people are already using. So, things that do deep fakes or create images, etc., but orchestrated by an agent that is autonomous. So to all intents and purposes, you basically take this Agentic AI and you task it with something. So, for instance, you might say to it, produce a phishing campaign that impersonates X bank. It produces a phishing campaign. It might even then launch it spontaneously into the environment, and it will see how well it performs. Maybe it doesn't do very well, so it will make, again, autonomously some changes to it. It might look out into the environment to try and work out why it's not getting the pickup that it might want to do. And then it will make those changes and it will launch it again. And it'll iterate continuously until it gets the outcome that it really wants. And sort of through the lens of fraudsters or criminals, cyber criminals as well to some degree, this is a really good opportunity because it becomes a massive force multiplier for their ability to basically defraud people or attack individual systems.
That sounds worrying in terms of the anti-fraud space. How are we going to begin to combat that?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. It definitely is a risk that we could see an exponential increase in scams and fraud and also cyber attacks. But the flip side of it is that whilst the offensive capabilities of Agentic AI are definitely a risk for banks and all sorts of organizations that operate digital channels, they're also an opportunity. Because if you think about, your sort of average security function within any type of organization, be it a bank or an e-commerce retailer, you employ those people, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. And during their working hours, they'll probably, write new rules, etc., to count different types of fraud. Well, they're now going to be faced with this continuous 24/7, 365 adversary. So the real question is, well, how do you mimic that in your own environment to write those rules in real time to counter? So we're really looking at a kind of an arms race between the defenders and the aggressors. And the real question for all of us is, how do we create a symmetrical battle versus an asymmetrical one?
Yes.
Well, you did ask.
I did. That did actually make a lot of sense to me. Thank you for explaining it so clearly. Where do you think the role of behavioral biometrics is going to come into this? Is it going to come into Agentic AI battle, the Agentic AI battle, or is it more something that we're going to be looking at in terms of the defense against Mule networks and things like that?
Agentic AI is definitely a risk that needs to be mitigated with behavior. Traditionally, we focused on things like bots, so non-human interactions in digital channels. And we'll see an increase of those types of, non-human interactions. So we need to detect them. We also need to be in a position to identify the ones that are legitimate and potentially allow those to happen within defined parameters, if that's what people want to do. But when it also comes to looking at other threats, so the flip side of every authorized push payment fraud, for instance, is a mule. So if you haven't got a mule, you haven't got an APP. Now, how do you actually recruit mules? Well, traditionally, they've been recruited through social media, for instance. It's a relatively intensive process. So, you have to post the right type of content. You get people to interact with you. A lot of that takes place through chat. There's a great opportunity for criminals to automate those types of interactions, the recruitment, the qualification. So instead of someone sitting there on WhatsApp typing to someone saying, do you have a job? Do you have a bank account? Do you have whatever their qualification criteria are? You can create a funnel for mules where people actually pre-qualify themselves before they get to a human. That's a massive opportunity for them. And also probably the other part is that we've heard about Claude Mythos and the fact that it was able to identify weaknesses in people's cyber controls. Agentic is, again, a really, really good way of building an agent that can identify the thresholds and controls and rules that exist in people's banking environments. So if you can work out that, a payment over 1,000 is going to invoke some sort of challenge and one that is under 1,000 isn't, then you can basically pitch all of your payments at 999 and launder without being subject to great friction.
If you were going to pick out one weakness that is specific or that is generic to the organizations who are here today, if you were a scammer and you wanted to target some of them, what would that weakness be?
It's a really, really good question. I mean, I think financial services has done a fantastic job of securing its digital channels. There is a reason why we see criminals pivot towards the customer, and that's because the customer has the keys. The customer has the keys to the channel to all intents and purposes. They have the ability to transact. So attacking them, deceiving them, manipulating them makes an awful lot of sense. I would, however, say that in fairness to the banks, whilst they may be, in a sense, the last line of defense, they are not the origin of these scams. Now, it is an unfortunate reality that the vast majority of scams start in the tech space, particularly in paid advertising. That paid advertising product is based on huge amounts of data. It's used to generate huge amounts of profit. There is absolutely no reason why the same technologies that are used to generate that profit couldn't also be used to reduce threat in that particular area. It'll be interesting to see what impact the Online Safety Act has. I can't say that I'm entirely optimistic, if I'm honest, because, we've seen that there's a lot of money to be made. But if you were to ask me to have one wish, it would be for there to be a solid correlation between the defenses that are put in place by banks and the defenses that are put in place by the tech sector.
One more question for you. If you were going to pick a specific investigation or event or moment from your career that really informs how you work now, what would it be?
Gosh, a particular moment that informs how I worked. I mean, in many ways, I formerly worked in law enforcement, and the UK's got a lot of things right in the sense that we took all of our fraud reports, all the reports that are made to police, and put them in one place. And actually, the system that we originally used to understand those reports was actually based on a money laundering product. The thing that was really interesting about it is that it really helped us understand the sheer volume of fraud that was coming from specific jurisdictions. So take tech support fraud. Before we had that centralized system and that understanding, we didn't really understand how many tech support frauds were perpetrated against people in the UK. Now, in my time, it was nearly 2,300, a month. The other thing that was really interesting as well is when you have that kind of that overtime view of those reports, something like the pandemic or even a public holiday in certain jurisdictions becomes almost a corroboratory factor in you understanding the origins of that crime. So to put it in really simple terms, public holiday in India, tech support fraud, down. Pandemic in India, lockdown, tech support down to nothing, basically. So, you can really understand the origins of some of this fraud. It's just continued to develop. But those insights are really crucial.
That's fascinating. So those specific events actually gave you much more clarity over geographical specialism in terms of which types of fraud were coming from where?
100%. You could absolutely see the origins of the fraud. There were other things like you could see the wholesale abuse of UK-based telephony services. And you could begin to get an understanding of the sort of mechanics and enablers that those criminals were using to perpetrate that type of fraud.
You mentioned earlier your one wish, if there was going to be a tweak, should we say, to the way that we deal with fraud in this country, is that if the online safety bill comes in, it's actually taken seriously and is effective. If you could make a single technological change, what would it be?
Well, a single technological change that's quite an ask.
It's a big one. Turn off AI.
No, I wouldn't turn off AI. I mean, if you follow those types of arguments, you'd say, well, the smoothest way to make sure that people don't die on the roads is to have no cars. I think probably it would be a genuinely well thought through cross-sectorial data sharing approach, tech, telco, financial services. I've been involved in some of those conversations in the past, and quite often, people would say, "Oh, well, I can't talk about sharing data because I don't know what data you've got." It's nonsense. Everyone's fundamentally got the same data. They've got customers, ergo data subjects. Those people have addresses, phone numbers, IP addresses associated with them, etc. Everyone transacts. There's no different to making a bank payment, sending a message on Facebook. It's just a transaction. It's an event at a point in time. That's all we need to do. We need to build a comprehensive data sharing opportunity across all of those sectors, and then we would make a big dent in fraud.
What a great answer. Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it.